I was recently introduced to a story that came at just the right time in my entrepreneurial journey. You know, sometimes the journey can be rough. It can be tough. There's potholes along the way. You know, I've heard it once said that success is all uphill. And sometimes in that journey we can second guess ourselves. Sometimes the journey can even be lonely. And often we question whether the hard work's ever going to pay off. Is this resonating with anybody? Is it just me on the journey that I'm on? I'll bet at some point in your journey, maybe you have felt that way. Is there ever going to be a return on all this hard work? Today on the Champion Forum podcast, I share some timely lessons that I learned from a potato farmer. Welcome back to the Champion Forum podcast, everybody. Jeff Hancher here, and I am on a mission to help others lead, inspire, and win in this life. Well, listen, I don't know if that intro intrigued you or not. You might be saying, what in the world can ever be learned from a potato farmer? Well, I thought the same thing until I was introduced to this article. And I'm literally, this is the first time I've ever done this on the show, where I'm literally going to read you a story. But hang tight. At the end of the story, I'm going to give you some of my thoughts around this. But if you've never heard this story before, I'll bet what you're going to do is fact check me. Because when I first heard about this story, I said to myself, there is no way this can be true. Once I validated the truth of this story, it began to speak to me on a very deep level. So check this out. Every year, Australia, they host a 543.7 mile endurance race that goes from Sydney to Melbourne. It's called the world's most grueling ultra marathons. It's so hardcore that usually only world-class athletes have the guts to even try it. And they only do that after training specifically for this event. It requires a very rigorous, specific training regimen because of how grueling that it is. And just so you understand, the kind of runner that normally runs in this marathon, they're under 30 years old. 30 would be like the peak. They usually are at the level of expertise where they have large companies sponsor them, big companies dropping money because it's like these are elite world-class athletes. That's what makes this story you're about to hear so unbelievable, and it's absolutely true. This story takes place in 1983 when an unknown man named Cliff Young showed up to run the race. What was the big deal about Cliff wanting to run, you might ask? Well, Cliff was 61 years old. If that wasn't out of the ordinary enough, he showed up wearing overalls and work boots. People saw him and thought, what is this guy doing here? He's got to be just here to watch the race. But no, Cliff was there to run. After he picked up his race number and joined the other runners, the press and other runners, they started to become curious. So curious that they had to confront him. They told Cliff, you're crazy, man. There's no way you can finish this race. He wasn't fazed by their doubt. He answered confidently with a surprising reason why he believed he could run the race. He told them, yes, I can. You see, I grew up on a farm and we couldn't afford horses or tractors. The whole time I was growing up, when the storms would roll in, it was my job to go out and round up the sheep. And just so you know, we had 2,000 sheep on 2,000 acres, and they weren't easy to round up. Sometimes I would have to run those sheep for 2 or 3 days. It took a long time, but one way or another, I'd always catch them. That's why I believe I can run this race. All of Cliff's confidence didn't change the fact that when the race started, the pros quickly left Cliff in the dust. The crowds watching thought it was funny because Cliff didn't even run well. He didn't run properly. He didn't have the same gait that everybody had. Cliff just kind of shuffled along. He looked so awkward that many people watching, they actually began to fear for old Cliff's safety. There's something else important that you need to know before you hear the amazing ending to this story. All of the professional athletes knew something that Cliff didn't know. They knew that it took about 5 days to finish the race, and if you were going to compete, then you had to run 18 hours a day and find some sleep in the remaining 6 hours left of each day. Guess what? Cliff had no idea that this tactic even existed. In fact, on the morning of the second day, everyone was in for a big surprise. Not only was Cliff still in the race, he had kept jogging all night long. People couldn't believe it. They asked Cliff what his tactic was for the rest of the race, and they couldn't believe his answer. He told them calmly, like only Cliff would, that he'd run all the way through the finish without sleeping. And guess what? That's exactly what he did. And the funny thing was that each night he came a little closer to leading the pack. Keep in mind, they blew off the gate past Cliff, but he starts edging up on them. And as unbelievable as this sounds, on the last night, he had surpassed all the young, world-class, corporate-sponsored athletes. To the amazement of everyone watching, Cliff was the first-place competitor to cross the finish line. If that wasn't shocking enough, he set a new course record. He cut the record by 2 days. One more thing you have to hear. When Cliff was awarded the winning prize of $10,000, he told people, "I didn't even know there was a cash prize." He told them he didn't enter the race for the money. And what he did next proved it. He ended up giving all of his winnings to the other 5 runners and kept none for himself. Wow. Here's some powerful lessons I wanted to share from Cliff's story. That I hope these lessons, even if it's a handful of you, that these lessons will keep you going when the odds are stacked against you. The first lesson that I learned from Cliff Young is this: just get started. You know, it can be tough to tackle another project or an idea when you don't have momentum. I sure know it is for me. It's a common problem that can be dealt with literally by just starting. You know, being crippled to start, as funny as it sounds, the answer is just start anyway. But here's the thing that I think has to happen. You start small. Do something simple and quick to get over your fear of starting. Sometimes we get crippled at the starting line and we never even begin. Take the plunge. Throw caution to the wind and go for it. You're never going to know unless you try. I'm not saying you have to literally jump off the cliff and hope that the parachute opens, but I am saying maybe you should at least start with something small. That's how Cliff ran his race, didn't he? He didn't worry about training or whether he could do it. He just showed up and started going. I don't think Cliff ever even thought that he might win it, and I gotta believe that there's no way that he thought that he was going to break the record by 2 days. Isn't it great that nobody told him all of the world-class athlete tactics? Had they, he would have done what they did. You know the old saying, if you do what everybody else does, you're going to get what everybody else has. Cliff missed the memo. Nobody told him that he should stop and sleep. He just kept running. You know what Cliff did? He started up. He started there, and he ran, not knowing exactly what was going to happen, maybe not even knowing how it would end. But he started. He showed up, and he started. The second thing that I learned from Cliff Young is this: make incremental progress. Once you begin, the next step is to focus on progress. First off, we got to start. Once we start running our race, let's just focus on incremental progress. Cliff's progress was slow. It was steady. He even ran funny. He had the Cliff Shuffle. But his famous shuffle, it meant that he made progress while others slept. For him, progress meant putting one foot in front of the other. Here's these world-class athletes that have the perfect gait and the perfect stride, and here's old Cliff shuffling. I believe I read in some other research about this guy that very race, every runner in that race, the majority of runners, now have the exact same gait that Cliff did to break that record. Isn't that amazing? The third thing I learned from Cliff is don't overcomplicate it. Complexity has killed so many great ideas. Simple solutions are almost always better. Perfection can kill progress. Cliff kept it simple by relying on what he knew. He wore work overalls and boots to run this race. Why switch it up? It's always worked for me. He used hot chocolate and water to nourish himself. Nothing fancy. None of these tablets or gel packs or, whatever it might be. Just simple things that have always worked for him. He didn't even know any better. But he believed that how he used to do it would somehow repeat itself. The fourth thing that I think we can learn from Cliff is focus on the finish line. I'm sure you've heard about the fear of success, where you dread getting something done because it's either going to get critiqued or you fear that now you might be held to a higher standard. This is the fear of success. The fear of success is more common than you think, because what if I am successful? Look, if I start, I might get critiqued, or I might actually be successful at this. And if I'm successful at this, people are then going to expect it, and then I got to even do more than I've ever done before. Part of this problem stems from this whole what's next syndrome. What's next? That's a major point of derailment for so many people who fear success. They're worried about their next thing. They're not focused on the finish line of the race that they're running right now. They're already worrying about things that haven't even happened, and they haven't even accomplished the race that they're running. By focusing on the finish line and nothing else, you can free yourself from those burdens and take things one step at a time. And sometimes that might mean you even have to shuffle your way across the finish line. That's exactly what Cliff did. Focus on getting to the end without worrying about sleep or what others are doing. By focusing on the goal, he could push himself to achieve more than his competitors. I don't even know if he knew where the other runners were. I honestly don't know, but I bet, knowing Cliff and what I've learned about this man, he wasn't racing against the other racers, the other runners. He was racing against the finish line. For him, it was endurance. Just not quitting. Just not giving up. I hope just as this story about Cliff Young was timely for me, that it's also a message that some of you may have needed to hear to keep running your race as well. Sometimes in life, I believe you just need to pull a Cliff Young. You don't need fancy gear. You just got to keep going and not give up. Don't listen to the naysayers. Don't worry about what others are doing. Run your race. Have a short memory, or better yet, no memory at all. What is Cliff's secret? Just keep going. Don't quit. While others run fast, you can just shuffle along with perseverance. While others impress, you can simply press on. While others stop for the dark, you can run right through the dark. The race is won by those who keep running through the dark. Till next week, keep running your race and keep turning the pressure into potential.